That was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
Honestly, RuPaul's Drag Race in terms of fashion has had such a huge evolution that it's even hard to grasp in terms of the amount of influence that it's had even beyond just its direct audience. Going into this video, you'll see how within these 16 years of the franchise, we've gone from the norm being Y2K realness to now extreme displays of conceptual approaches to avant-garde drag. Yet how did we get here? Well, before we start, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as we're almost about to hit 100,000 subscribers. Hopefully we'll get there by the end of the year. Follow me on Twitter at GreenGayYT and follow my brand new Instagram and TikTok at itsGreenGay. Now let's begin. The season 1 to 4 era of Drag Race is probably the closest we will ever get to really just off the rack outfits not being a hindrance to contestants' performance in the competition. For starters, season 1, we could barely even see the garments that the girls wore because of that horrible Vaseline filter. Although that wasn't exactly an issue. Runways didn't yet have a standard, so these queens would actually be the ones setting it. Another important note is that back then, most of the queens had a realness take to their fashion, to pretty much just look like a girl that you'd see walking down the street during a night out. If anything, the only glimpse people got into what drag could be was with Nina Flowers, who represented the club kid scene, a subgroup that emphasized going out of the box. Yet it would take a while before that began to really come into popularity again within the drag world. Keep in mind that season 2 aired in the year 2010. Some of you watching this were probably just learning how to walk. Looking at James Ross, aka Tyra Sanchez, and Raven, who went on to be the top 2 queens of the season, despite them obviously making it to the end, when you really look at what they brought to the runway, a lot of it was good to a degree, although in the long run, it wasn't all that memorable. It seems that during these early years, a lot of what impressed the judges or audience depended on how well each of the queens was styling their outfits together. Plus, when it came to Tyra, she was one of the first queens to really tell a story. One of the highlights being when she did the wedding runway, where she was praised for the storytelling she displayed by offering 3 different perspectives to one look. In a way, that's part of the spark of the original season. At one point, preparing for Drag Race consisted of you throwing all the drag you currently had in your closet into a suitcase and flying off to rob all your way through the competition. Yet now, it's gotten so expensive to prepare that production themselves is giving queens stipends to help gather stuff for it. But is this necessarily a bad thing? And what exactly jump-started this shift? For a long time, the lack of experience that we as viewers had made it so that we could be blown away by things that others may have looked the other way if it happened today. Most of us weren't fashion experts, so it was like we were being introduced to it for the first time, even though a lot of queens were drawing references from the outside world. What's interesting to think about is how a lot of the more basic looks from the modern era would be considered safe or even good in the older seasons. The expectations wasn't that you needed to look expensive all the time. Just by showcasing a concept or any degree of imagination would usually be enough to sell it to viewers. In fact, one of the best things I found online while putting together this video is this comparison image of the Denim and Diamonds category from season 2 to season 10. And in just those 8 years, it's already extremely stark of a difference. I mean, arguably Mo Hart's look is reminiscent of season 2, yet even then, the worst of season 10's category would still be among the top in season 2. That reminds me, I actually hope that they do something like this again. We need to see them take one of these older runway themes from the original seasons and do it, let's say, for season 18, so we can really have an almost 2-decade difference in drag eras. Unfortunately though, it feels at times the World of Wonder doesn't really like to repeat certain themes for the sake of not seeming like they're recycling things. But to be honest, not only do they always repeat the same format for challenges, it really would be cool to see them take things like the Death Becomes Her category from season 7 to the forefront of viewers once again. Like, imagine with the budget queens bring now, what they'd be able to create. It would also be beneficial if the series figured out a way to weave their way into introducing more horror type of drag. I mean, they don't have to go full out Dragula, but I think Drag Race Spain has showcased that if you give queens the opportunity to try to shock us, they'll fully go for it. That brings us, of course, to Raja, that a good portion of queens consider an important figure within the evolution of the series. What's interesting about Raja's approach to her season 3 runways is that when you look at the runways of pretty much any other queen, you sort of think to yourself how far Drag Race has come since. Yet pretty much every single one of Raja's runways still holds up to this day. It's part of the reason why people call her a fashion icon. It just so happened that when she entered the competition in the 3rd season, she would be one, if not the first queen who truly was giving us the vibes lives that she could be in a real fashion show. Plus, you could literally plop her looks onto, let's say, season 15 or 16 and it would still hold up. Something that can't be said about all of the runways that we saw back then. Thus, getting into the season 5 to 7 era, while still not exactly the most elevated, had a more refined aspect, especially when it came to runway categories. It was now the 2013 to 2014 era of the series, so part of the hive mind behind the fanbase was the excitement for each episode's runways. It was also a rise in the more campy aesthetics getting the most amount of attention from people, like Alaska or Milk, who tended to lean a lot more on that idea. Ultimately, this was probably the last time period prior to a real shift that was about to take place. Between season 8 and 9, we slowly start to see certain queens going into this season who decided to spend a lot of money when it came to their runway packages. Those that did were getting a lot of attention from not just the judges, but the fanbase too, that would begin to make them part of Drag Race history. I mean, here we had Kim Chi literally blowing us away every single week. It's also why Violet Chachki's step down look from the season 8 finale is constantly referenced. Like, I know some of you are probably sick of hearing just how great this was, but it really did grab the bar that had been set in terms of show-stopping moments and catapulted it to a level that would be hard to ever hit in the years that followed. I bet even Violet loses sleep at night, wondering how she herself will be able to one day outdo the look. It's shortly after this that you could tell Drag Race started to really affect the drag world as a whole. This meant that yes, you could be a drag queen that didn't care about Drag Race, but whether you liked it or not, you were now being influenced by it, even if it was just as simple as being in proximity to queens who were. Around the 2016 era, Naomi Smalls was one of the first queens to really become known for her lack of padding on the runway. This sparked a trend that would only slowly start to die off in the past couple years, with queens like Jimbo or Plain Jane emphasizing their love for padding. Regardless, it was a revelation for people to know that there wasn't one specific way to do drag. Different forms of approaching the art form were becoming validated, and with it, new fashion trends were on the horizon. That's why many queens today credit Naomi for having given them the inspiration to want to build their drag aesthetics. Subsequently, after season 8, the seeds of capitalism slowly began to grow. As we head towards the end of the 2010s decade, a lot of unknown designers were really skyrocketing their names into relevancy thanks to their work being presented on a stage as big as Drag Race. Names like Diego Montoya, Marco, House of Caney have become synonymous with the show, because you can always expect at least one of their new creations to be featured by one of the queens who decided to go all out with their runway package. What I also find interesting is that before, you'd only really hear their names for either looks that queens brought to finales or some special occasion. So it's impressive that nowadays there's contestants that spend the equivalent of a finale look on every single category they get. What's more is that if you want to know just how far-reaching the series is, rumors have circulated that a good portion of the fashion industry, especially the gays, tune in for Drag Race. So a lot of iconic looks ends up inspiring them. An example was Pheromone's entrance look for All Stars 4, where allegedly Ariana Grande's designer had stole the concept for the look that Ariana wore on the Seven Rings music video. It was a whole thing, yet it did bring to the forefront the fact that A-listers like Ariana had members of their team that knew the potential that Drag Race could be in terms of show-stopping fashion moments. As we get to season 10, this would mark not just the end of the first decade of the franchise, but also the next batches of Ru Girls were going to have to be investing a lot of their finances onto their drag if they were going to be having a chance at succeeding. Part of this was due to Aquaria, who on her season, quite honestly, never had a moment where she didn't look bad. There was such a polish to what she delivered that you knew whenever she'd set foot on that runway, it was gonna be something different from the rest of the girls. The whole season in general was a serve in terms of what queens brought with them, all except for Monet Exchange, who to this day jokes about how bad most of the runways she did on season 10 were. After all, she was just a broke queen that was doing what she could with the resources available to her. That's why going into All Stars 4, there wasn't much of an expectation for what she would bring, ultimately working in her favor, as everyone would be blown away with what she presented, bringing to the forefront that fashion was now turning into a method of communicating more than just the queen's style and was now indicative of their success. I mean, one could argue that money can't buy taste, which is true, but for the most part, it does higher the chances of delivering something from a more elevated caliber. Thus, finally, in the year 2019, there was no denying that Drag Race was now merging with mainstream fashion outlets, such as when RuPaul, Violet Chachki, and Aquaria attended the Met Gala, or how Ru Girls were constantly being invited to red carpet events, along with it now becoming the norm to see Drag Race queens walk important fashion shows. Not just that, but there's queens out there that work behind the scenes to help glam up certain celebrities, most of which we probably don't even know about, like Carmen Farala, the winner of Drag Race Spain Season 1, that went on to work alongside Chanel, the representative of Spain in Eurovision 2020. 2022, designing and making the outfit that she performed live in front of millions of people. Essentially, the opinion of a drag queen, especially those who know fashion aesthetics, makeup skills, and even wig styling, are a huge asset to people in Hollywood. Speaking of which, while in terms of runway package, maybe some queens were now having to get in debt to have a chance at success, Evie Oddly served as a refresher in season 11 to remind people that it wasn't actually all that necessary for you to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a package, just as long as you had the creativity and skill to create your own looks from a cheap budget. The best example of this was the look she did for the Fringe runway, where she came out in this pink jellyfish look. It was the type of thing that is so easily accessible that it would sort of make anyone else think to themselves, damn, why didn't I think of that? Although Evie Oddly's drag is something that I haven't seen many girls replicate in the years that followed, at least consistently and successfully to the degree that she did. That being said, while there are very few true fashion icons in the drag race world that have had a long-standing effect, season 13, though it's only 4 years old, gave us Simone, who went on to win and left a lasting impact on how drag and fashion is perceived. In her own way, Simone was a cultural reset with her approach to presenting her drag. At a time when most queens were spending tons of money on designers to create elaborate pieces, Simone did the same thing, but brought outfits that provided a much more in-depth story than we had gotten used to seeing. This wasn't just someone throwing money at a designer to cook her up some gag-worthy looks. It was clearly a collaborative effort with a lot of passion behind the intentionality of what was being presented. This run stands in contrast to another event that would happen in the same year, which was the now infamous H&M moment from Drag Race UK season 2. During the girl group challenge, RuPaul became visibly frustrated when Joe Black wore an H&M dress on the main stage, subsequently reading her to filth during the critiques with, quote, "I don't want to see any effing M&M." It was a clear message that wearing off-the-rack items could harm a queen standing in the competition, no matter how well they wore it. Which, yes, you could argue had been the case for a while up until that point, but it was the first time that Ru straight up laid it out on the table, so that both the viewers and future queens would know better next time. Speaking of, the rise of international franchises has also showcased how vastly different aesthetics can be across countries, despite all of them falling under the same art form. A prime example is Drag Race UK, where one of the most noticeable differences was how their drag seemed less polished or perhaps less expensive compared to what audiences had become accustomed to seeing in the US. However, that didn't take away from the artistry. Many of the queens were there for the pure love of drag, not just to achieve the dream of getting on the show, because up until then, RuPaul hosting a UK franchise seemed impossible. Although just because your drag scene isn't in America doesn't mean that it won't be up to par. Take Drag Race Philippines for instance, where queens have consistently impressed the fan base with the level of polish on their runways. But it's not just the polish. There is a unique degree of cultural influence that sets it apart from other installments, sort of like Drag Race Thailand that's about to air their 3rd season. That being said, how would you explain the fashion evolution of Drag Race? And is there a certain time period that's your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Also, go check out these videos you see on the screen now that you're done this one. You might as well check it out. Who knows, you might find it pretty entertaining. To make it easier, there's also a couple playlists you can check out, or even scroll through some of my shorts if you want something quick. I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, Sari Tish, Natasha De Leon, Las Potitas, and Cool Gal Nan. And in the Green squad, we have Cayman Rider Furry, Edgar Allan Pup, The Only Sean, IJS, Jack Beck, Not a Punch But a Keek, Captain Chaos, Bashir with the Good Beard, Galeria Gomez, Dea, Sarah G, Scarlet Rose, Boiled Peanut, Kimberly Marin, Max Whale, and Olivia Marr. If you'd like to see your name on the screen, you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please comment below to help with the algorithm, and I'll see you guys next time.